A single word can change how we view people who participate in medical research. You can choose words that empower, humanize, and build trust, or you can choose words that erode trust, disregard people, and contribute to bias. And one word that is particularly troublesome in medical research is the term subjects. And in this video, I'm going to share why this term is a problem and what terms you can use instead to show respect, empathy, compassion, and kindness to people who take part in medical research. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And I help clinicians, scientists, and medical writers write with clarity and confidence. So why is the term subjects a problem? To understand the problem, we need to look at the difference between the denotation and the connotation of words. So denotation refers to the direct and specific meaning of a word, or the definition, and connotation refers to the suggested meaning of a word, or the ideas or feelings associated with that word. For example, consider the term public speaking. The denotation of public speaking is the act or process of making speeches in public. But the connotation for many people carries feelings of anxiety, fear, and dread. So the denotation is different from the connotation, and both aspects are important to consider when it comes to the meaning of words. Now, let's consider the denotation and the connotation of the term subjects. So subjects can be used as a noun, adjective, or verb, so the word has many definitions, which can be confusing for readers and even lead to misunderstanding. But in medical research, we are most interested in using the term subjects as a noun to refer to people who take part in a study. So as a noun, the word subjects can mean an individual whose reactions or responses are studied. This definition seems appropriate in research and relatively harmless. However, there are other definitions of subjects, and these definitions include one that is placed under authority or control and one that is acted on. So these definitions have a connotation that suggests a power difference. And this power difference can fuel a perception that people who participate in research are objects or less than the people who are carrying out the study. And this perception is disrespectful, demeaning, dehumanizing, and even pejorative. And these connotations and perceptions can contribute to bias even at a subconscious level. And they can also deter people from participating in research and even hinder scientific discovery and medical advances. Now, you might be thinking, well, I see the term subjects used all the time. And you can find it in all sorts of places because it was once considered an appropriate term. So you'll find it in the literature, you'll find it used by health organizations such as the NIH and the FDA and the CDC. You'll also find this term in federal regulations that govern medical research, such as the Common Rule or the Belmont Report. But just because you see the term used doesn't mean it's correct or appropriate. So my hope is that authors will stop using the term subjects in their publications and that all health organizations and federal regulations will update the terms that they use to exclude subjects. And this is much like what has been happening internationally at the World Health Organization, in the Declaration of Helsinki, and in the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. That's a mouthful, but it is a really important regulation in clinical research. So you might also be wondering what style manuals in the medical field recommend, especially if you are a medical writer who uses style manuals all the time. So the manuals most often referenced in the medical field include the AMA Manual of Style and the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association, or the APA Manual. So the APA manual states that subjects is acceptable, but to me, acceptable is not the same as appropriate. So despite what the APA manual allows, I recommend using a different term. And the AMA manual states that other terms are preferred to subjects. Now you might be wondering what those other terms are. The most common and preferred term is participants, and this term has a single clear definition of one that participates or takes part in. Now, I would argue that this definition should be one who participates, but this is the definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So with this single clear definition, there is less risk for misinterpretation or misunderstanding. This term also does not connote a power difference like subjects does, so it's more respectful to people who take part in research. Now, although participants is the most common and preferred term, sometimes it's not always the most accurate, precise, or appropriate choice. So what can you use instead? One option is to use the term volunteers. This term may be most appropriate for non-therapeutic research or to refer to a comparison group. For example, the NIH defines a healthy volunteer as someone with no known significant health problems who participates in research to test a new drug, device, or intervention, and whose health information can be used as a comparison. Personally, I think this term can be misleading or inaccurate, so I prefer the term that the AMA manual recommends, which is control participant. So the AMA manual defines a control participant as a person who does not have at least some of the characteristics under study or does not receive the intervention but provides a basis of comparison. So this language infers that the control participant may not be healthy. Also, the term volunteer may not always be appropriate because sometimes people in medical research could not consent or willingly participate. For example, people who have died or people whose family provided consent on their behalf did not volunteer. Another option is to use patients. This term often works well in medical research, but it's not appropriate in all cases. For example, if people in studies are not receiving medical care, such as survey research or community projects, then patients is not the accurate term to use. Another option is to use the term sample. This term would be most appropriate for analyses of large de-identified data sets, like retrospective chart reviews. Sample would also be appropriate when discussing established statistical terms and when describing study designs, such as between samples estimate. Another option is the term case. However, like subject, the term case can be dehumanizing when referring to a specific person. So case is best for when you refer to an instance of a disease or disorder, and patient or person is best for when you refer to someone who is affected by a disease or disorder and they are receiving care from a healthcare professional. Another option is the term clients, but only in certain cases. For example, this term might be appropriate in some academic, business, school, or other settings, and it might also be appropriate for someone who is receiving care from a psychologist or who is enrolled in a program such as a treatment program for substance misuse or other disorders. Another option is respondents, and this term is most appropriate for survey research where participants respond to a survey. Another option is consumers, but this term is most appropriate for describing people who consume information on the internet or maybe sometimes in economic studies. And another option is the term users. So this term might be appropriate in technology-related research, such as if you are testing a health app in a group of people. But in the case of consumer or user, participant usually works well and is more universal. But no matter what term you use, The best thing to do is be as specific as possible. Use terms that clearly, accurately, and precisely define the person or population. So instead of participant, you might use children, adults, women, men, or people with a certain condition, such as patients with hypertension. And in some cases, you might even consider consulting the people in the study population to learn what term they would prefer. For example, different populations might prefer the term autistic people, and others might prefer people with autism. So there are a variety of terms that you can use to refer to people who take part in medical research. And in case you are wondering, there isn't one best term. In many situations, participants is the most clear and respectful choice. In others, you'll need to carefully consider the context and refer to people in a way that is clear, accurate, and precise, and that shows respect, empathy, compassion, and kindness to people who take part in medical research. Now, if you want a resource to help you choose the best words to use, you can bookmark this video, or you can check out my publication on how to choose the best words to describe people who take part in medical research. I'll add a link to the description box in case you want to check that out. And if you want to learn a few more clinical terms that are often misused or confused, I'll add a link to a video about what I think are 5 clinical terms that are the most often confused at the end of this video. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.